Storytelling in games can be, and most of the time is, direct. It tells us what's going on, character motivations, contextual information on factions and groups characters associate with. There's a lot to tell in a story. Games like Red Dead, Tomb Raider, Uncharted, Last of Us are story games where the story unfolds as we play it. But Elden Ring and the whole Soulsborne franchise alongside other games don't follow that. The story isn't told directly. We get told the basics of what happens, like in Elden Ring and Dark Souls, but the actual intricate narratives, the context of the world is left unexplained for us to figure out and put the pieces together ourselves. So looking at Elden Ring, we're told through the story trailer and the opening cinematic the basics of the story. Ranni created a plot to destroy the Golden Order. She did this by killing Godwyn the Golden with the Rune of Death, by killing him in spirit, leaving his body to rot, which eventually becomes the reason for Deathroot to sprout across the lands between. Marika would break the Elden Ring, which sends her children and the other demigods into a feud where they fought for control. The most notable demigod being Miquella, Ranni, Radahn, Melania, Morgott, Mohg, Malekith, and Radagon, and Godfrey. All of the above, except for Godfrey, have part of the rune on their persons, which we acquire after killing them. The most important are Miquella, Ranni, and Melania due to them being Empyreans, meaning they've been chosen by the Two Fingers to be a successor of a New Age, though with Radahn and Mohg at the time they weren't that relevant to the story, but with the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, it retconned their importance, making them a vital part of Miquella's Age of Compassion. When I first entered into the world, nothing was told to me except through the trailers and the opening cinematic. We asked questions like what is the Erdtree, who are these demigods, what is the Elden Ring? We venture through the lands between fighting, gathering equipment and leveling up. But even after beating the game, the lore is still vague, and just like every other Soulsborne game, the lore is told through tidbits like character dialogue and item descriptions. But it isn't for everyone. Most people buy a game to play casually. I like to think of it like a spectrum. One end are casual gamers and the other end are hardcore gamers, which I would think encompass gamers who play competitive games and gamers who are invested into the lore of their favourite games. Most people would be in the in-between on the spectrum, but some would be on the opposite ends. I use this idea of a spectrum to help visualise in my head how people approach games. The world building and narrative style in Elden Ring is not for everyone. As I said, most people would buy to play a game, not to figure out the intricacies of a story. Games like Red Dead are quite simple in world building because it is based in a real time period, the American frontier. Because it's based in that real world time period, people are familiar with it, which makes it easy and approachable to get the game, because we're so familiar with cowboys, deserts and gunslinging. With Elden Ring, it's made from the ground up, so to figure out motivations, who the characters are, would be difficult. It's the same across the Soulsborne games, it's all made up and not based on existing pieces of media, with a slight exception to Dark Souls. With each game, it's a new storyline, new bosses, new locations, but because it's a trilogy, the foundational elements remain the same, like with the bonfires and the Soul of Cinder. Like in Dark Souls 3, some bosses relate back to the bosses we fought in Dark Souls 1. The Abyss Watchers are related to Artorias, and Aldrich uses the dead body of Gwendolyn. The narrative style and world building best works on a standalone game, like Elden Ring and Bloodborne. They use existing genres like high and dark fantasies and gothic fantasies, but the stories themselves remain vague. One major part of Elden Ring's world building is found in Limgrave, giant stone structures half buried in the ground. We can see how they relate with crumbling Farum Azula. The distinct architectural style tells us this. The description of the ruin's greatsword also adds to this. Quote, originally from the ruins which fell from the sky, this surviving fragment was honed into a weapon. The ruin it came from crumbled when struck by a meteorite. As such, this weapon harbours its destructive power. So this tells us about the origins of Farum Azula, a floating city which fell due to a meteor. We can actually see what Farum Azula would have looked like in the past. When we're first introduced to this city, it's crumbling and floating while surrounding a storm, the ancient dragons eons ago still residing there. We can find a secret location to lie in which allows us to go back in time to see what Farum Azula would have looked like in the past, before the Golden Order. This is also the same arena where we fight Placidusax, who's the Elden Lord of his time. Another part of the world building which adds to Farum's obscure past is found in Caelid. As we go to the edge of Caelid, we come across two vital locations, the Farum Great Bridge and the Bestial Sanctum where Malekith hides. A site of grace in Farum Azula is called besides the Great Bridge. With these pieces of information, we can deduce maybe that Farum Azula was a floating city attached to Caelid, as shown with the Great Bridge. But even with the evidence, it's not definitive, and I think that's what makes Elden Ring's world feel mystical. We can have the evidence, but there is no answer. It's very vague, and I think that's what makes the world feel ancient. We can't exactly piece the full story together, only major parts like the ancient dragons and Marika's rise to power. The Shadow of the Erdtree DLC gave us more questions than answers. What is the Shadow Tree? Is the suppressing pillar in the Shadowlands representing the definitive centre of the lands between, or is it more symbolic? I like to think that it was once part of the Lands Between, since we have the village where Marika was raised, that being the Shaman village. People have tried to impose the map of the Shadowlands over the Lands Between, and by seeing this we can see how some parts align perfectly and others don't. Another version I saw aligned the suppressing pillars with the divine towers. Again, it adds to the vagueness of the lore, there is no true answer to the question. But I don't think this type of narrative is for everyone. I think most people would prefer the storytelling to unfold as they play. This ambiguous storytelling is what I like to think made for people who want to immerse themselves in that world. Not saying you can't with traditional storytelling, but it works better if you're immersed, because it's up to you to piece together the world as much as you like. You can commit and try to piece the full story or just do the main bosses. That's what makes this world building storytelling really good, because it's all up to us.